somebody could respond back and give us an update on what's happening at EU level. The basic high-speed broadband definition at EU level at the moment is 30 megabits per second. Now, none of us believe that that's high-speed broadband. I know that when I was Minister, I pushed hard to get that definition increased to 100 megabits per second. I understand that there is ongoing engagement between the Commission and Member States on this, so if we could be updated on it. And just on a positive aspect, this time last December, when you were in before the committee, I raised the issue of broadband connections to marts around the country, explained the difficulty that marts were having, gave you a list of actually marts that I had identified where there were specific problems. And in fairness, I think you have come up trumps with 11 of them, including our own mart in Castlereagh, which I think is a very positive development, where they have had very poor broadband service there. Can I ask, and I know Mr O'Hoban has referenced this on a number of occasions, that a big part of the problem and the failure to deliver this year has been COVID-19. And as I said in my opening introduction, that the planned build next year is just 800 homes more per month than this year, when the projection is that we won't have the issues of COVID-19. So it just doesn't add up that there's a big problem with COVID-19 this year, and yet we're only able to deliver 800 homes more next year when we don't expect a problem with COVID. Can I ask, not one person, and I've gone through the transcripts from the Public Accounts Committee, I've gone through the transcripts from the Department of Communications, and from the evidence we've heard here this morning, Air doesn't seem to have a problem with COVID-19. It has achieved its make-ready target and gone beyond that for this year. So how is it that one telecommunications company has been able to achieve its targets in terms of the delivery of the National Broadband Plan in relation to the make-ready, despite COVID, and yet National Broadband Ireland, the reason that has been given for that has been the issue of COVID? And just, if COVID has been such a problem in terms of the teams on the ground, was this ever communicated to the Health Service Executive? Because the Health Service Executive specifically established teams to look at serious infection rates in meat plants. Never once, and I scrutinised this quite in a lot of detail in terms of various outbreaks, never once did I hear of any of the public health teams around the country talking about a problem with telecommunications companies. So if you could clarify that for me. I've received a tweet from an individual here this morning. I'm going to read it out, and if maybe Mr Neary could respond to it. It says that just finding out that we can't have NBI fibre and a landline telephone. Apparently, NBI connections don't support the two. Our mobile phone reception is not good at home, and we really rely on a landline. So if you could maybe provide an answer in relation to that. On the issue of communications, Mr Neary, you spoke about the example in Castle Plunkett, and you said, look, the company NBI works on the best information that they have available to them. Now, I furnished to you last week a case, a constituent of mine who this summer received correspondence from NBI stating that they would be connected to the high-speed fibre network by this autumn. And now they've received further communication stating that it will be a further 5 years away, 2026, before they will get it. Now, in this instance, the surveys were completed, the design was completed, and the design had been completed months before they got this particular correspondence. So the best available information to the company was not reflected in the communication to this individual. And this is just one example. I can bring you to communities in South Roscommon, in East Galway and in Mid Roscommon where they have got similar correspondence from NBI. So what exactly is going on with the communications strategy? And just, Mr Neary, you said that the contractor will go as far as it can where it's technically possible to do so. What is the limit of that technical possibility? I know you have mentioned in terms of SACs and so forth, but what is the technical limit of the actual build-out? This comes back to, I think, the fundamental core of the problem here this morning, is that COVID-19 isn't the single biggest factor that has caused the problems and delays that we have to date. And all we have to do is look at what the Taoiseach said to me last week in the House, and said in the House 2 weeks before that, when he flagged that there was a problem in getting permission to erect poles. Now, that's a problem from local authorities across the country. Now, I received a reply on the 14th of October in response to a parliamentary question regarding the mobile phone and broadband task force, which was specifically established to deal with these particular problems, where there was a lack of connection between the telecoms companies and local authorities and other state and semi-state agencies. Now, bizarrely, that task force sat for the very last time the month before the contract was signed. Now, in that reply of the 14th of October, we were told that there was a joint utilities local authority user form which was being used to address the problems between the local authorities and the contractor. If that's the case, then why did we have a new contract signed between the local authorities and why did we have guidelines issued from the Minister for Housing in August? Why did we have the Minister bringing the planning officers together last May if this particular forum was already working? And why did the CCMA, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr O'Connor, but my understanding is the CCMA have written to the departments asking that the task force be re-established. So they themselves obviously believe there is a problem if they are seeking the re-establishment of a task force that hasn't sat in the last 2 years. Can I also ask, the Secretary-General of the Department in evidence last week before the Public Accounts Committee said that one of the 3 original contractors, the UK-based Kelly Group, didn't decide to do work here, and that left us high and dry with the delivery of 140,000 kilometres of cable. How big a factor has been the fact that Kelly Group did not take up that contract, and what action is being taken to recoup some of the costs as a result of that? So the task force, as I say, was abandoned in October of 2019. The contract was signed in November of 2019. The programme for government was published in June 2020 and promised to fast-track the National Broadband Plan. The government's remote working strategy, which stated that they wanted to prioritise the delivery of the broadband plan, was published in January 2021. But the guidelines issued by the Department of Housing only happened 21 months after that to local authorities. 21 months after the contract was signed, 14 months after the commitment was given in the programme for government, and 8 months after the remote working strategy was published. I understand that there is now a new agreement between National Broadband Ireland and AIR in terms of fast-tracking the Make Ready programme. But why has it taken 23 months since the signing of the original contract for this review to take place, considering that 16 months ago a clear commitment was given in the programme for government to look at fast-tracking it, and the remote working strategy was published 10 months ago? And I know that there has been a problem with Irish Rail. I know that fibre cable has gone as far as Irish Rail and won't go under or over the rail line. And I understand that there is now an agreement in place with CIE 23 months after the contract was signed, 16 months after there was a commitment to fast-track this in the programme for government, and 10 months after the remote working strategy was published. And we now have, in terms of Transport Infrastructure Ireland, a trial taking place out in Blessington in terms of anomalies there in accessing the licensing and infrastructure. 22 months after the contract was signed, 15 months after the commitment in the programme for government, and 9 months after the remote working strategy. So clearly there's a lack of joined up thinking here between government, state agencies, semi-state bodies and local authorities. And clearly one mechanism that could have dealt with a lot of this was the task force that was specifically established to do that and had been stood down the month before the contract was signed. But this is not just me that's coming up with this interpretation. Clearly, the CCMA believes the same thing, or they wouldn't have requested that this be re-established. And the chairman of the Communications Committee last month, Kieran O'Donnell, said it would appear that one of the areas that probably requires a bit of tightening up is to get the road opening and planning licences streamlined through the local authorities. And the answer from National Broadband Ireland is, if a dedicated resources within each local authority could be put in place to handle our licence applications and processes in a timely fashion, it would be of great benefit to us in attempting to complete this plan in less than 7 years. Now, you've been aware of this. You've been aware of the problems for the last 2 years. Why has the task force not been re-established? Why have these issues been left to drag on? And a result of that, 75,000 homes have to wait longer. They are the issues that the public want answers to. And they want to know that there is joined-up thinking right across government departments, agencies and bodies to deliver this, because it is a basic piece of infrastructure that every citizen in this country wants and should have the right to receive as quickly as is humanly possible. Thank you.
In your opening remark, you referenced COVID and said it was being blamed and used as an excuse, and you've also questioned if COVID was a reason for the delays. I just think I have to deal with that. I have to deal with that up front. COVID was a reason for the most significant reason, and has had the greatest impact on why the National Broadband Plan is 6 months behind. That's not an excuse, and it's just a reality. We've lived through a pandemic, and it's impacted every business in this state and how it operates. You're absolutely correct. Telecommunications was a service that was allowed to continue through COVID. But Fergal has already outlined some of the issues and challenges around recruitment, mobilisation of key contractors, supply chain and logistic delays. You mentioned the Kelly contractor. And yes, they've been replaced since, but there's an immediate impact of not having one of your key contractors there. There were travel restrictions in Ireland. These people have to be out on the road building networks and surveying. They would normally be staying in hotels and B&Bs. They couldn't. So journey times are longer. The recruitment process took longer. Can you imagine if the group of us here today were to try and do a redesign of something that we're involved in, like NBI was trying to do in terms of designing a network, and you're doing that over Zoom as opposed to at a whiteboard? It was a difficult time. It's not an excuse. And it's not a question of blaming, it's a question of stating it as a reason. It's a matter of fact. COVID has impacted. In terms of when you look to the year ahead, the impact continues, because things that didn't happen in that first period impact on timelines for the next period. The number that's there for next year, it's NBI has said 132 to 144. The department will challenge every aspect of what NBI submits to it in the coming weeks in relation to what it can deliver next year. And as Fergal has outlined earlier, where relief is granted, it can be granted, but delays are delays. And I'm not going to offer, to prejudge what will come to us and what the outcome of the department's assessment of that will be. But it will be the same as it was for 2021, which was a really, really intensive scrutiny of what NBI had put forward as being the reality of the world that it faced and the challenge that it faced. And I think, you've offered a view that, which actually, I suppose, you've offered a view which I have to defend, and say that the team of people who looked at that from the department did their job, and they did their job well. They had external advisors to assist them where we didn't have the technical or financial or commercial expertise in-house, and then we used the people in-house as well. And I'd have to stand over the job that was done and say they came up with the right decision on that. And they were hard in terms of their engagement and their scrutiny of what was before them, and they will continue to be the same. You've referenced the task force, and you obviously feel quite strongly about the task force, and I know you have a history in relation to its establishment. But when you look back to what was the task force established for, it was very much in advance of the National Broadband Plan. It was when Ireland was in a procurement process for a National Broadband Plan, and there was not a company there to deliver that plan that could engage for itself in terms of what it was going to need to do. That task force was very, very effective, and it delivered over 70 actions over 3 years. It got a much longer life in that period than had been anticipated because the procurement took longer than any of us wanted. The task force last met, you're correct in saying, in October of 2019. And there might be a perception out there that people have done nothing since and the work hasn't continued. It absolutely has. The work of the task force, one of the core issues that the task force focused on was access to infrastructure and the licensing regime with local authorities, development contributions, and it took actions there that were successful. But after the National Broadband Plan contract was signed, the world had now moved to a new place where now we were not talking about doing things in advance of a potential contract that the government might agree to, but we were talking about an implementation of a contract that the government has signed. And if you're looking for action, the contract was signed on the 19th of November 2019. 1 day later, the CCMA had its regular quarterly meetings that we have with the department. And at those meetings, this is where the CEO level of local authorities are meeting with the Secretary General of the department and the Assistant Secretaries responsible for specific areas. There's a 4 or 5 item agenda. 1 day after the contract was signed, National Broadband Plan was on the agenda for that meeting. And it's been on the agenda for every meeting the department has had with the CCMA since. The colleagues in the Department of Rural and Community Development managed the Telecoms Advisory Group. National Broadband, that group met on the 13th of December 19. It met 9 times in 2020. It met 7 times in 2021, and I think it's meeting tomorrow. Our departments work together through that group. National Broadband Ireland, as you already heard today, uses that group as an opportunity, as a conduit of information back and forth with the local authorities, where every local authority is represented by the broadband officers. The Section 254 licences were recognised as being a critical issue, and they've been raised by National Broadband Ireland. In the early days of that engagement, we would have been pressing National Broadband Ireland as hard as they might be pressing the state today in terms of its level of performance, in that we were pressing them to make sure they had the team in place with the right skill sets and the right bandwidth to be dealing with every local authority in Ireland, who have a range of other projects coming at them as well. And I believe that today National Broadband Ireland has that team in place, and a combination of the guidance that was developed by the departments working with the LGMA, the CCMA, the Roads Management Office, the broadband officers, our departments consulting, the 2 departments you have here today, but also the Department of Housing involved in bilaterals between the departments. There was extensive engagement there. And that culminated with new guidance being delivered to all local authorities, and Minister Ryan addressing a conference with senior representatives of every local authority in May of last year, just when the build programme is taking off, just at the time when Section 254 applications are going to become live. The numbers of them to date are not as big as they will be in the next year, and that guidance is critical. And since those guidance were put in place, a steering group was put in play, which involves our department, National Broadband Ireland, the CCMA and the RMO, and effectively it's a troubleshooting house for issues that arise, because we know that when you get down to individual areas there will always be unforeseen issues that will arise, but it's a troubleshooting house and it's there to deal with that. So I certainly would have to push back very hard at any contention that the work of the task force hasn't continued. And even when you step outside of the actual broadband space, from May of 2020, the work of the task force, which saw the power of it was that it brought national departments, state bodies, local authorities, telcos, regulators together. That's continued. And when we found ourselves in a pandemic where people without good broadband were going to have to rely on mobile broadband, when we found an immediate spike of 40% plus in voice traffic and 20% in data, and networks potentially could be challenged with it, actions were taken there. Actions were taken there working with the telcos and with Comreg, our department working with them, our department working with the Department of Education across issues in that space. The work that the task force began has been powerful, and the relationship and the collaboration which it has instilled as a way of working in Ireland has continued. In terms of the actual forum itself, the two departments are at a very, very advanced stage of developing a work programme to put to the ministers to agree for the next phase of the work of the task force. But the fundamental point I would make here today, that in terms of the National Broadband Plan and the rollout of the National Broadband Plan, there is nothing that would have been achieved with a task force meeting. In fact, the energy that was invested in what I have just described to you and in new engagements, which were more appropriate to circumstances where you had a contract in place rather than a potential for a broadband plan. They have actually been powerful tools in ensuring that we are as far advanced as we are with the plan today.
Thanks. I'm going to ask the Deputy to Mr. O'Hoban just before I finish. I don't dispute anything you say. I know that COVID-19 was a difficulty, but I do dispute the re-establishment of the task force. I think it would have made a difference, and I'll tell you the key difference it would have made is there would have been a minister leading that task force, which was the case in the past. And as anyone that has been involved in the task force knows, it did make a significant difference in actually moving issues along. That's not an issue for you. It's above your remit, but I just want to put that on the record.